There are wounds that bleed, and there are wounds that cannot be seen. One cries out, the other whispers. One leaves scars upon the flesh, the other corrodes the mind. Among the most insidious of these invisible wounds is a phenomenon so quiet, so delicate in its movements, that its victims often don't realize they are bleeding until the very notion of truth has slipped from their grasp. Gaslighting. The word itself feels strange on the tongue, part illumination, part suffocation. It comes from a story where light is dimmed, flickering, while a man convinces his wife that the darkness she notices isn't real. That story was a play, but in real life, gaslighting is not staged. It is lived, endured, suffered in silence. What makes gaslighting monstrous is not its noise, but its stillness. It does not arrive like a storm, announcing itself with thunder. It seeps in like fog, untraceable, altering the landscape until you can no longer recall what the world looked like before. At first, it seems like nothing more than a difference of memory. You remember someone saying a certain thing, they insist they never did. You recall an event vividly, they calmly shake their head. You laugh it off, thinking, perhaps I misunderstood. But the seed is planted. Then it repeats. Each time a little more doubt creeps in. Are you sure? I think you're overreacting. You always imagine things. Slowly, the mind, your mind, begins to betray you. You start questioning not just the memory of last night, but the memory of last week, last month, last year. You question your senses, your judgment, your sanity. The tragedy of gaslighting is not that someone lied to you. Lies are common. We all survive them. The tragedy is that someone convinced you to lie to yourself. They taught you to silence your own perception, to distrust your own inner compass. And once that compass is broken, you are no longer merely controlled, you are lost. Gaslighting is the theft of reality itself. It is the weaponization of doubt, the subtle distortion of truth, the corrosion of the foundation upon which identity rests. And it does not only haunt couples behind closed doors. It echoes in childhood bedrooms where parents rewrite memories. It reverberates in workplaces where power rewrites promises. It thunders across nations where leaders rewrite history. To understand gaslighting is not only to understand manipulation, it is to understand the fragile architecture of the human mind, how easily certainty crumbles, how desperately we long for validation, how deeply we rely on others to anchor reality. This is not merely psychology, this is philosophy, this is existential, because once your reality is stolen, once you surrender the authority of your own memory and perception, what remains of the self? And so we begin, not with an explanation, but with a shattering, a descent into the trembling moment where certainty fractures and the world you thought you knew slips away.
Chapter 1. The Shattering of Certainty. Imagine standing in a room you know by heart. The window has always been on the left, the chair always near the door, the faint scent of cedar lingering in the wood. But tonight, something is wrong. You look at the window, and it's on the right. You insist it has always been on the left. But the person beside you smiles, shakes their head, and says you're mistaken. You argue, but they are calm, steady, unyielding. They remind you, with unnerving certainty, that the window has always been where it is now. You doubt yourself, laugh nervously, but deep inside, a tremor begins. What if they are right? What if you have been wrong all along? That is the haunting entry point of gaslighting, a phenomenon where the mind becomes unmoored, where perception and memory are destabilized, where one's grip on reality begins to loosen, not because of natural confusion or illness, but because someone has deliberately twisted the frame of truth. Gaslighting is not merely lying. It is not simply manipulation. It is the corrosion of certainty itself. When a lie is told, you may still hold on to your truth, but when you are gaslit, your truth is poisoned from within. It is as if a parasite burrows into the fabric of your memory, turning familiar landmarks into shifting illusions. At its core, gaslighting is an act of ontological violence, a direct assault on one's reality. To understand it, one must enter the strange psychological battlefield where words become weapons sharper than knives, where silence can echo louder than screams, and where the human need for belonging becomes the very lever of domination.
Chapter 2. Where Gaslighting Lives. Gaslighting does not belong to one domain of life. It is not confined to lovers whispering contradictions in the night. It is a migratory cruelty, finding its way into households, workplaces, and even entire nations. Wherever truth can be distorted, wherever trust can be exploited, gaslighting sets down its roots. In relationships, love's mask. Perhaps the most familiar form is in the intimate orbit of romantic love. Here, gaslighting does not announce itself as hostility. It masquerades as care. A partner cheats, and when confronted with evidence, messages on a phone, unexplained absences, they smile softly, as if your discovery is a misunderstanding. You're paranoid, they say. You always imagine the worst. The phone they keep face down on the table is just a habit. The lipstick stain on a collar is a trick of the light. At first, you resist. You know what you saw. But their calmness unsettles you. Their certainty begins to outweigh your own. After all, who wants to believe the person they love is lying? It is easier to believe that you misunderstood. And so the word crazy begins to echo in your mind. Not shouted, but whispered. Not proven, but insinuated. Slowly, you wonder, am I? Here, gaslighting is most devastating because love itself becomes the bait. You're bound to the very person who dismantles your reality. The hand that erases your perception is the same hand you reach for in the night. To love them is to long for safety, to stay with them, to ensure its absence. This duality is the snare. In families, childhood's broken mirror. Step inside a family where a child says, "You scared me when you yelled," only to hear, "That never happened." Or where a child recalls neglect, only to be told, "You're exaggerating." Or worse, "You're too sensitive." Here, gaslighting becomes inherited silence. Parents, consciously or not, rewrite the child's memories to preserve their own image. A beating becomes discipline. A night of chaos becomes you making a big deal out of nothing. The child absorbs the message that their feelings cannot be trusted. Their pain is imaginary. Their memories are wrong. They grow up with an internal fracture. Part of them remembers the wound, but another part has been trained to deny it. This fracture follows them into adulthood. They doubt their instincts in relationships. They silence their anger in workplaces. They distrust their own sadness, wondering if it is real or just an invention of weakness. When gaslighting occurs in childhood, it corrodes the very foundation of identity. If the mirror of childhood is where the self first sees its reflection, family gaslighting cracks that mirror into shards, and the child, now grown, is left to piece themselves together from fragments. In workplaces, the corporate stage. Gaslighting thrives wherever power is unbalanced, and few places reveal this unbalance more starkly than the workplace. Here it wears the uniform of professionalism. A boss makes a promise of a raise, then later denies it. "I never said that." A manager overlooks your work, then praises another for the very same idea you offered. When you raise concerns, you're told you're misunderstanding policy, or worse, that you're too emotional to be objective. This is not mere miscommunication. It is the deliberate reshaping of memory to protect authority. Gaslighting in the workplace keeps employees compliant, hesitant, doubtful of their own grievances. The stakes are not abstract here. They are financial, existential. To challenge the manipulation is to risk your livelihood. To stay silent is to lose your dignity. Many choose silence. They learn to second-guess themselves, to swallow resentment, to accept the corrosion of reality as the cost of survival. In nations, the collective hallucination. But perhaps the grandest theater for gaslighting is not the home or office, it is the stage of society itself. Here, gaslighting is not whispered in bedrooms, but broadcast on screens. History is rewritten, atrocities are minimized or denied, oppression is reframed as protection. Citizens are told they are prosperous even as poverty spreads, free as their liberties shrink. A leader declares there is no crisis, even as the streets burn. Officials speak of alternative facts, transforming truth into clay to be molded. A government insists we are united, even as its people fracture into warring camps. This is not simply lying. It is not even propaganda in its traditional sense. It is gaslighting, because it erodes not just belief, but the confidence to know what is real. Citizens begin to doubt not only their government, but their own judgment. They ask themselves, am I the only one who sees the cracks? And so silence spreads. To dissent risks exile. To question risks being branded unstable, unpatriotic, dangerous. The manipulator wins not by persuading the masses, but by convincing them to doubt their own eyes. The emotional climate of gaslighting. Despite the differences in setting, whether it unfolds between lovers, within families, in offices, or across nations, the psychological climate it creates is strikingly similar. Victims describe confusion. A fog descends over memory. Events blur. Certainty becomes elusive. Isolation. Others don't see what they see. They feel alone, defective, unseen. Shame. They begin to believe the whispers that they are too emotional, too irrational, too flawed. Dependence. The manipulator becomes the only anchor, the arbiter of reality. Gaslighting is not just control of behavior, it is colonization of the mind. It implants the abuser's voice inside the victim, a voice that echoes long after the abuser is gone. The wounds no one sees. Unlike bruises or scars, gaslighting leaves no evidence for cameras to capture. This is why so many victims struggle to be believed. They look outwardly intact, while inside their sense of reality disintegrates. Psychologists describe this as the erosion of epistemic confidence, the collapse of faith in one's own ability to know. And once that collapse is complete, identity itself begins to dissolve. Imagine being told for years that your eyes deceive you, your ears betray you, your memory invents lies. Eventually, you hand over the keys of your reality to another. That is the invisible bruise, the unseen fracture gaslighting leaves behind. Why it remains invisible? Part of the tragedy is that gaslighting rarely fits society's neat definitions of abuse. We are taught to look for bruises, to listen for screams. But gaslighting is polite, calm, often gentle. It wears the mask of reason, the voice of care. Outsiders see nothing wrong, and victims, doubting themselves, cannot fully explain what's happening. This invisibility is its camouflage. It hides in plain sight, thriving precisely because it does not look like the violence we expect. The universal vulnerability. What becomes clear is that gaslighting flourishes everywhere humans rely on one another for reality, and that is everywhere. We are relational beings. We need affirmation, recognition, validation. It is this very need, the beauty of our interdependence, that makes us vulnerable. For if someone we trust insists our perception is flawed, we are wired to listen. Gaslighting, then, is not the mark of a weak mind. It is the exploitation of what makes us human.
Chapter 3. The Mechanics of Manipulation. To understand gaslighting is to step inside the machinery of the mind, the place where perception is shaped, memory is stored, and trust is woven into the fabric of identity. Gaslighting does not succeed because the victim is weak. It succeeds because it hacks the very architecture of how humans experience reality. Memory, the fragile archive. Memory feels permanent, like a library of facts stored on solid shelves. But neuroscience tells us otherwise. Memory is not a recording, it is a reconstruction. Each time we recall an event, we rebuild it, subtly altered by present emotion, later knowledge, and suggestion. Gaslighting exploits this fragility. When the manipulator calmly insists, "That never happened," they plant a competing narrative. The victim recalls the event, but now their memory competes with an alternate version. Doubt slips in. Perhaps my memory is faulty. Perhaps I misremembered. Over time, the manipulator repeats their version so often that the victim's recollection bends. The original memory, already pliable, reshapes itself around the gaslighter's insistence. What was once clear becomes blurred, until the victim is unsure whether the event ever occurred at all. The terrifying truth is this: gaslighting does not merely challenge memory, it can alter it. The victim begins to carry memories that belong more to the gaslighter's narrative than to their own lived reality. Perception, the betrayal of the senses. We trust our senses to anchor us. If we see smoke, there is fire. If we hear footsteps, someone is near. But perception, too, is vulnerable. It is filtered, interpreted, shaped by expectation. Gaslighters exploit this interpretive gap. They tell you the words you heard were not what was spoken. They insist the tone you sensed was never there. They say the look you saw in their eyes was only in your imagination. This steady undermining destabilizes the senses. Soon, you hesitate. Did I really hear that? Did I imagine the look on their face? The once reliable compass of perception now feels unreliable, fragile, treacherous. And when perception is untrustworthy, you no longer inhabit a stable world. You inhabit a shifting fog where every sound, every sight, every feeling is suspect. Emotion, the weaponization of sensitivity. Emotions, too, become ammunition in gaslighting. The victim feels hurt, and the gaslighter responds, "You're too sensitive." The victim feels anger, and the gaslighter sighs, "You're overreacting." The victim expresses suspicion, and the gaslighter shakes her head, "You're paranoid."
In this way, every natural emotional response is pathologized. Sensitivity, anger, suspicion, these are not treated as signals to be respected, but as flaws to be corrected. Slowly, the victim learns to distrust not only memory and perception, but also their own feelings. The inner voice that once guided them now feels like an enemy. Trust, the Trojan horse. Gaslighting does not work in a vacuum. It requires a bridge of trust. The manipulator is often someone loved, admired, or relied upon. That bond becomes the Trojan horse through which doubt infiltrates. If a stranger on the street denied your memory, you would laugh it off. But when a parent, a partner, a leader insists you are wrong, you listen. You give their words weight because you give them trust. This is why gaslighting is so effective. It exploits our most human need, the need for connection. Trust is the doorway through which reality is stolen. The cycle of self-doubt. The process of gaslighting often unfolds as a cycle, each turn tightening the victim's dependency. Contradiction. The manipulator denies or distorts an event. Doubt. The victim questions their memory or perception. Defense. The victim argues, provides evidence, insists. Dismissal. The manipulator rejects the evidence, remaining calm. Defeat. Exhausted, the victim withdraws. Dependence. The victim, uncertain of their own reality, leans on the manipulator for clarity. Round and round this cycle spins until the victim no longer bothers to resist. The abuser no longer has to impose control. The victim imposes it on themselves. Why strong minds break. It is tempting to believe that only the weak or fragile fall prey to gaslighting, but this is a dangerous illusion. In reality, the strongest, most self-aware minds are often the most vulnerable. Why? Because strong minds are often reflective. They question themselves, they analyze, they strive for fairness. These very strengths, introspection, humility, openness, become weaknesses in the presence of manipulation. The gaslighter twists them inward, turning the victim's virtues into weapons against themselves. In this way, gaslighting does not reveal weakness, it reveals the tragedy of how strength can be hijacked. The slow death of certainty. What makes gaslighting so devastating is not one argument or one denial, but the accumulation. One drop of doubt is easy to dismiss, but drip by drip, day by day, those doubts hollow out certainty like water carving stone. Eventually, the victim wakes not into clarity, but into fog. Their memory is unreliable. Their senses are questionable. Their emotions are suspect. Their trust is misplaced. And in this fog, identity itself begins to dissolve. For what are we, if not the sum of our perceptions, our memories, our feelings? If all of these can be dismantled, what remains? Gaslighting is not just manipulation, it is annihilation by erosion.
Chapter 4. The Aftermath of Gaslighting. When the curtain of gaslighting finally falls, when the manipulation is exposed or the relationship ends, the story does not simply conclude. The end of gaslighting is not the end of harm. It is the beginning of aftermath. And that aftermath is often more insidious, more haunting than the manipulation itself. Because gaslighting does not just wound, it rewires. It alters the victim's relationship with memory, with perception, with selfhood. Even when the gaslighter is gone, their voice lingers in the recesses of the victim's mind. The echo of doubt. Survivors often describe leaving the relationship only to discover that their inner dialogue has been colonized. The gaslighter may no longer be present, but their words remain. You're too sensitive. You're remembering it wrong.
"You always overreact." These phrases echo like ghosts, reappearing in moments of vulnerability. The victim may doubt their own judgment in new relationships, in professional decisions, even in trivial daily choices. The gaslighter's voice becomes internalized, a parasite feeding on the victim's trust in themselves. It is a cruel paradox. Freedom from the abuser does not guarantee freedom from the abuse. The victim carries the abuser's voice like an infection long after the source is gone. The collapse of identity. Gaslighting erodes the building blocks of selfhood, memory, perception, and emotion. When these are destabilized, identity itself falters. Survivors often struggle to answer questions as simple as, "Who am I now? What do I believe? What can I trust?" The collapse of identity manifests in many ways. Loss of confidence. A once decisive individual now hesitates over minor choices. Fragmented memory. Past events feel blurred, uncertain, sometimes as if they belong to someone else. Alienation from feelings. Emotions no longer feel like trustworthy guides, but suspicious impulses. The victim becomes estranged from themselves, as though looking in a mirror and seeing not a reflection, but a stranger. Trauma beyond bruises. Gaslighting leaves no physical scars. There are no visible wounds to point to, no broken bones to prove the violence, and yet the trauma is real, profound, and enduring. Psychologists often compare the aftermath of gaslighting to post-traumatic stress. Survivors may experience hypervigilance or a heightened state of alertness, always scanning for deception. Flashbacks, sudden reliving of gaslighting episodes when someone questions their memory. Avoidance, withdrawing from situations that might trigger doubt or conflict. Numbing, suppressing emotions for fear they will be dismissed or mocked. These are not minor inconveniences. They are scars of a psychological battlefield where reality itself was the terrain of war. Trust as a ruin. Trust once broken does not easily repair. Survivors of gaslighting often find themselves suspicious not only of others, but of themselves. Can they trust a partner's affection? Or is it manipulation waiting to bloom? Can they trust a friend's encouragement? Or is it another form of dismissal in disguise? Can they trust their own memory of yesterday? Or will tomorrow reveal it to be wrong? Life becomes a hall of mirrors where certainty is always just out of reach. This erosion of trust poisons intimacy. Relationships that should be sources of safety instead feel like arenas of risk. The survivor craves connection but fears it, longs for closeness but recoils from it. The legacy of silence. Perhaps the most devastating aftermath is silence. Survivors often struggle to articulate what happened to them because gaslighting resists language. How do you explain to others that your reality was dismantled without scars, without evidence, without proof? When they do attempt to speak, they may be met with confusion. Maybe you're overthinking it. It doesn't sound that bad. Are you sure you're not exaggerating? And suddenly the old wound reopens, the same dismissal, the same doubt, now echoed by outsiders. This silence compounds the harm. The victim is not only destabilized by the gaslighter, but also isolated by a world that cannot easily comprehend the depth of the manipulation. The hollowing out of time. Gaslighting also robs survivors of something precious, time. Years spent in confusion, in self-doubt, in psychological captivity. When the fog finally lifts, survivors often look back with grief. They see the years that could have been lived differently, years of laughter, of growth, of freedom, stolen by a reality that was not truly theirs. This awareness can provoke rage, but also despair. To mourn stolen time is to confront an irreplaceable loss. The invisible scar. Unlike visible abuse, gaslighting's aftermath is often dismissed because it is unseen. Yet its scar is no less real. It lingers in second-guessing, in distrust, in the inability to stand firmly on one's own perception. The victim may walk into the world looking whole, but inside they carry fractures in the very structure of selfhood. Gaslighting does not just end when the abuser is gone. It echoes, it reverberates, it colonizes the psyche, leaving an aftermath that is not merely survival, but a lifelong reckoning.
Chapter 5. Breaking the Spell. Gaslighting thrives on fog, on confusion, on silence. To break free from its grip is not merely to leave the gaslighter, it is to reclaim reality itself. This reclamation is neither quick nor simple. It is not a single act of defiance, but a long pilgrimage back to the self. Naming the unnameable. The first step in breaking the spell is naming it. To say the word gaslighting is to pierce the silence that protects it. Many survivors describe an almost electric relief when they encounter the term for the first time. Suddenly, what felt like madness becomes method. What felt like personal failure becomes recognized abuse. Language, in this sense, is liberation. To name the manipulation is to begin separating the self from the gaslighter's narrative. It is the planting of a flag. This happened. This was real. I was not imagining it. Reclaiming memory. Once the manipulation is named, survivors can begin the delicate task of reclaiming memory. This involves journaling, speaking with trusted allies, or working with therapists who validate rather than dismiss. Each remembered detail is like a brick in the rebuilding of reality. Slowly, the survivor reconstructs the timeline that was fractured, piecing together a coherent story. The act of remembering becomes defiance. To hold on to one's own version of events without apology or doubt is to resist the gaslighter's colonization of memory. Trusting the senses again. Gaslighting teaches the victim to doubt what they see, hear, and feel. Healing requires retraining the mind to trust its own instruments of perception. This might mean grounding exercises, feeling one's feet on the earth, noticing the colors in a room, listening carefully to the tone of a voice. It may sound simple, even childlike, but it is profound. To anchor oneself in sensory experience is to reclaim the right to inhabit reality directly, without distortion. Every time the survivor trusts what they perceive without apology, the spell weakens. Rehabilitating emotion. If the gaslighter turned emotions into weapons, healing requires embracing them as allies again. Anger, sadness, fear, joy, each feeling has wisdom. To say, "I feel hurt and that matters," is to reverse the indoctrination of dismissal. Therapy, support groups, and authentic relationships can help revalidate emotion. In these spaces, tears are not mocked, but honored. Anger is not dismissed, but explored. Sensitivity is not condemned, but celebrated. Slowly, emotions become guides again, pointing the survivor toward truth rather than shame. Rebuilding trust. Perhaps the hardest step is rebuilding trust in others and in oneself. This requires patience and courage. The survivor must learn to risk connection again, to risk intimacy, to risk being vulnerable. Trust does not return all at once. It begins in fragments. Trusting a friend with a secret, trusting a partner with a fear, trusting oneself to make a decision without overthinking. Each small act of trust is like a stitch in the torn fabric of connection. And over time, those stitches hold. The role of rage. Rage is often maligned, but in healing from gaslighting, it can be sacred. For years, the victim's anger was dismissed, pathologized, turned against them. To reclaim rage is to reclaim dignity. Rage says, what happened to me was wrong. I deserved better. I will not allow this again. When guided with care, rage becomes not destruction, but fuel. Fuel for boundaries, for justice, for transformation. Forgiveness or not? The question of forgiveness often arises, but here it must be reframed. Forgiveness is not an obligation the survivor must pay. For some, forgiveness may come naturally, as a way of releasing the hold of resentment. For others, it may never come, and that too is valid. What matters is not whether the abuser is forgiven, but whether the survivor is free. Forgiveness, if it happens, is for the survivor's peace, not the abuser's absolution. Reclaiming time. Gaslighting steals time. Healing means refusing to let the theft define the future. Survivors reclaim time by creating new experiences, friendships rooted in authenticity, projects born of creativity, lives lived without apology. Every moment lived freely is a reclamation of what was lost. It is a defiant statement. You did not destroy me. I am still here. I am still becoming. The philosophical victory. In the end, breaking the spell of gaslighting is not only psychological, it is philosophical. To reclaim reality is to affirm that truth exists, that perception matters, that the self is real and worthy. It is to stand in the storm and say, I know what I know. I feel what I feel. I am who I am. This victory is not loud. It does not always roar. Sometimes it is a whisper, steady and resolute, like a flame refusing to be extinguished. And in that whisper, the survivor discovers something profound. Though gaslighting sought to erase them, it failed. The self, fragile yet resilient, emerges not destroyed, but reborn.